All right, 9:02. That's usually my 2-minute limit for kicking off. Obviously, we'll be recording this, so if anyone misses the beginning, that's fine. So, yeah, hey everyone, and welcome to our latest AMA, where we come on to provide live updates about, latest or upcoming releases, features, initiatives coming out on the platform. We said in the new year that we'd be back to our bi-weekly cadence for AMAs, so here we are. And this week's AMA is going to be focused on governance and voting. So in case you missed it, at the end of February 2025, we announced earlier this week that voting and elections are going to be officially launching on Lamina1. So we are here with you all today to answer some questions about our current governance and voting plan, and also to provide a little bit of a sneak peek about kind of like upcoming election logistics, nomination requirements, our upcoming vote token airdrop, and a bunch of other things, again, that we're going to get kind of deep into today. I think, for folks who haven't been keeping up with announcements or whatever, we did post a blog post on the Lamina1 Medium earlier this week, which laid out a lot of this stuff in text form. I'm posting it in the chat now. That's kind of going to serve as the basis for today's conversation. So especially for folks who like English isn't their first language, obviously we do our AMAs in English because that's our core team's native language, but that one, you can put it through a translator. It goes over a lot of things like, what the voting calendar is going to look like, some specific kind of like requirements and logistics that we laid out. We wanted to make sure that we got that in front of you all a couple of weeks in advance, just to give the community an opportunity to, react to it, share thoughts and feedback, poke holes in it, everything that you guys are so great at doing. So anyway, I'm joined here today by, as you can see, Lamina1 Chief Technology Officer Will Carter. He's been one of the many architects of the Lamina1 voting and governance plan and is a total expert on the sort of on-chain and behind-the-scenes mechanisms that'll be driving elections when they roll out in a little bit less than a month. So welcome, Will. How's it going?
Going well. It's good to see you all again, and looking forward to jumping into some of the governance topics. Just wanted to say, if you guys see anything or hear anything during this AMA and you have ideas or concerns or feedback you want to provide, this is the reason we're doing it, and we're happy to receive it. So, yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Amazing. Oh, wow. Squid, you've already got a German version out of the Voting, Elections, and Governance Guide. That's awesome. Love to see community localization of content. So sick. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted to actually just kick off this session with some initial questions designed to kind of provide an overview about what we kind of presented in the blog post this week and get any community members kind of up to speed on what's coming up for elections on Lamina1. So Will, question one, just kind of like a brief overview, like what can community members look forward to when voting launches on Lamina1 in basically about a month?
Yeah, so as you probably know, if you read the white paper and sort of the most recent announcement, the first iteration of governance is going to be voting on our first OMMA council seat. So this will be a community filled seat on the OMMA council, which again is the council which is sort of driving the financial parameters on the network. So like the issuance of the token, the unlock rate of the token, this basically gives you as a representative of the community a way to sort of start to influence those parameters moving forward. There are going to be additional aspects of governance coming later on, including another council, including, proposals, including ways to vote on projects that you think are interesting that would go for funding, all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, in terms of what's going to be available next month, we will have a vote token. So for all of you that have been staking, you'll be airdropped vote tokens based on your staking participation. For those of you who stake for the launch of the vote token, the vote tokens will automatically be generated for you proportional to the amount you're staking. And we'll get a little bit more into the mechanics of that, I think, in the next week or so, once we figure out what that exact proportion is going to look like. There's going to be contracts for nominating. So the first step of the election process is going to be to nominate people in the community who you would like to see as representatives on this council. And it's from that list of nominees that you'll be able to use those vote tokens to vote. And then we'll have a new tab in the hub, which sort of goes through all of the phases of the election, guides you through them, allows you to nominate, allows you to vote, allows you to fill out applications, which sort of share your intentions and uh, reasons why you want to be a council member. And then finally gives you the results of the election, allows you to sort of verify that the election was fair. And then on the Discord channel, we'll have dedicated areas for all of the candidates to sort of host their own discussions with the community, as well as sort of more communal general areas for all of the candidates to sort of talk amongst themselves. So there's going to be a lot kicking off, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, I think, as the AMA goes. But that's the gist of it.
Yeah, that's a perfect overview. I think big question is like, why launch now, like 90 days following the launch of staking on the platform? Was that in order to kind of get the economy up and running before we started voting? Like, what was the thinking behind that decision?
Yeah, so I mean, this is true in basically all decentralized networks that launch. Is like you want to put some guardrails in place to make sure things don't go horribly wrong. Specifically in those initial days and months post-launch. It's so usually you sort of start with very strong guardrails. In this case, like the only 2 seats on the council are filled by the core team as well as the foundation. And that's again to make sure like nothing goes horribly wrong in the first few months, and you can sort of set the stage for stable elections and governance moving forward. So that's why the 90 days. There's also sort of the aspect of making sure we have time to figure out how these elections are going to work, how the voting process is going to work, facilitate feedback, incorporate that feedback, all that fun stuff. So part of it's development timeline and just making sure we have the time to get it done right. And then the other aspect is basically with all these platforms, you usually have a short period of time immediately after launch where just the platform is like a little bit more controlled and on guardrails before you know, hand the reins over to the community.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, you went a little bit over kind of the function of OMMA, right? This is the kind of the Open Metaverse Monetary Authority. It's kind of the economic authority, right? Control of unlock rates, issuance rates, that kind of stuff. And you know, you just mentioned that right now that's just filled by the foundation seat and a core team seat. But obviously, since this is, you know, our first election that we'll be rolling out, what will whoever's kind of elected from the community be responsible for if elected to that seat? I think that's a pretty big thing that I want to make sure is like super clear. Like, what are we going to be nominating and electing this community representative to do on that council?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's really important that you sort of elect someone to the seat, or it's important for the person joining the seat to be like relatively level-headed and to sort of understand in some relative depth the mechanics of sort of blockchain economies in general, but specifically our blockchain economy. Um, you don't want someone who's going to sort of the whole point of this council really is, and the reason why we didn't do sort of a direct democracy approach to this, and I think some of this motivation is spelled out in the white paper, it's to sort of allow for some deeper, less reactive thought to very important financial decisions for the network, um, or monetary decisions for the network, monetary policy decisions for the network that aren't like sort of reactive to like the day-to-day feelings or day-to-day market conditions. So like there's a lot of us who have locked up tokens, and like our immediate emotional response is to say like, let's unlock those tokens. You as a member of this council are going to need to weigh those desires against like the macroeconomic and microeconomic aspects or impacts of doing that. So like, what is that going to do to the overall token supply? What is that going to do to the volatility of the token in the various markets? What is that going to do to availability of the token? And you need to, you know, participate in discussions about that with the community at large and both internally with the other members of the council. You can make sort of an informed decision. And then you're going to have tough skin, because some decisions that you make as a member of the council are going to piss off like 50% of the people. You're never going to make everyone happy. So it's a big responsibility to be on this council. You're going to have to make a lot of hard decisions. There's going to be people angry with you, regardless of which decision you end up making. And so, like, I'm not going to say it's an easy or even, glorious position to be in, but it's an important one. So I think you want to try to find someone, or if you're looking at becoming a council member, make sure that like this is something you're willing to do, and this sort of experience of meeting regularly, really digging into the mechanics of these decisions, and then representing the decisions to the community is all stuff you're comfortable doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And also kind of like, what about OMMA? So that's the Open Metaverse Arts Council. As we mentioned, that's actually going to be rolling out, the first election for that is happening Q2 2025. Jacko Girl's in the chat kind of asking, I mean, not directly asking, but I think it'd be worth kind of talking about like why prioritize the sort of OMMA election before the Open Metaverse Arts Council election? And also just like,
Mm-hmm.
how is that council kind of different than the former?
Yeah, so OMAC, I don't know. In my mind, if I was going to join a council, I'd probably want to be on OMAC. OMAC's going to be maybe the stakes might be a little less dramatic, and the content might be a little more interesting for the vast majority of people. OMAC, the Open Metaverse Arts Council, is sort of where you're driving the creative direction of the platform through grants, through initiatives for creators, through sort of selecting interesting creators, and creations to sort of showcase on the network. It's going to be more about engaging with the community and with creators than sort of setting monetary policy. The monetary policy we decided to do that sooner for a couple of reasons. Number one, the period in which we can make changes to the monetary supply parameters in the network is on a quarterly basis. And so we wanted to try to get someone in from the community into that council before the first period in which we made those changes. So we wanted to sort of prioritize that over OMAC. OMAC is something that it's going to be around. It's going to be making decisions throughout on a day-to-day or week-to-week. There's no like strict cadence on how it can operate, but there's a strict cadence built into the smart contracts of the monetary supply. And so that was one reason. The other reason is OMAC, because it has sort of a broader vision, because it's got maybe like a more diverse set of responsibilities. It's going to take a little bit longer to sort of implement ways in which the council can actually facilitate that role. So it's going to mean like, ways to showcase projects, ways to vote on projects and proposals. And that all takes like significantly more UI work than just voting on not even voting, selecting some economic parameters for the next quarter. So it's simply going to be a little bit more work to implement like all the infrastructure around OMAC.
Yeah. So basically, we've got a big sort of economic window coming up soon, and then there's also tons of practical reasons, right? Which is why we're kind of doing this phased rollout, right? Like we want to do OMAC first. That'll be a somewhat simpler kind of election and infrastructure to launch, and then once we get through that, OMAC will be, we kind of mentioned this in the paper, but in addition to having the OMAC election, that's also when this kind of proposals and like upvoting of projects is also going to launch. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff that the team has been kind of like working on and thinking about like how that'll work. But obviously that's a lot more complex than just a simple kind of nomination vote. And even that is, fairly complex as we've been working through it for sure. So next question is like, Will, what kind of style of governance would you say the Lamina1 model platform is modeled after? So you kind of talked about this, like it's not exactly like a complete 100% direct democracy, right? Like we've got this council structure. The white paper obviously goes into this more in depth, but like, do you want to give a little bit of an overview? Like, how do you think about like the style of governance or the structure that we're kind of going with here?
It's fairly heterogeneous, I'd say. Like there are probably going to be some direct democracy aspects. So there's a representative democracy aspect, which is like the two councils. But even within those councils, there might be decisions that are put forward for direct vote. So while you vote in people who will basically make the monetary supply changes themselves, sort of without any vote from you outside of the election. The OMAC Council might, say every quarter we're going to choose 10 projects, 5 of which are voted on by the community that we're going to put forward for, direct funding or crowdfunding or something. I'm just brainstorming here, but that type of thing might mean that you as a community member get to vote on a very specific, concrete proposal versus just a representative. So there's going to be aspects of both. And then even within the ways that you vote, both in the election and for specific proposals, there might be different types of voting. So like ranked choice versus, simple voting. Whether or not the votes are public while you're voting versus hidden until the end of the election. There's going to be a lot of different mechanics we're looking at for all of the different portions of governance. So it's hard to sort of label the entire governance system as one specific kind. There's going to be different levels and different types of governance applied. And a lot of that'll be sort of via your feedback on which works, which you'd like to see. From my experience, governance in general in blockchain and even outside of blockchain and the regular world, it's really hard to get good participation. So good turnout, as they call it. You usually have a lot of people who are, very driven and very, focused on voting and making decisions in the network. And then you have others who either don't want to or don't have the time to or don't feel like they have the knowledge to. So there might be aspects of delegated governance, delegated democracy, where you can sort of assign your votes to other people to make on your behalf. Something we're considering. And then also aspects of optimistic governance. So like in general, if a few very dedicated people show up and vote on something and there isn't a lot of people sort of voting against it, then it'll go through. And that's like, as opposed to sort of a threshold vote where it's like, hey, if 66% of people vote on something, we'll do it. That's actually really difficult to do. It's really difficult to get like a set high percentage of turnout. So those are, I don't know, it's a long answer. It's probably not a very concrete and specific one, but we're still sort of figuring it all out. And like I said, each component will probably have its own version.
Yeah, for sure. In this kind of first election, is a bunch of this voting is what's happening on chain versus what's happening off? Obviously that's like a big thing. A lot of different places use a combination of on and off. And so where do we stand on that on Lamina1?
Yeah, this will probably change from this first election to subsequent elections and then even like direct proposal votes. I'll talk specifically about what's going to happen in this election. The nomination process will be completely on chain. Your nominations will be selected and put on chain directly into a nomination smart contract. The voting process itself, so the act of actually using your vote tokens, that will be an on-chain transaction, but the tallying of the votes will happen off-chain, and a Merkle proof will be given to you to verify that your vote was included in the overall tally. That's meant to provide some level of confidentiality to your vote. It's not a perfect solution. So I'll give an example. Like, if you're not familiar with a Merkle proof, it's basically it's used all throughout blockchain, but it's sort of a clever way to use a tree data structure and hash checkpoints as you go down that tree to prove to someone that a leaf of that tree is included in the overall tree. And so if we look at all of the votes in the election as leaves in the tree, I can give you a proof that any leaf at the bottom of the tree leads up and matches the root of the tree. And so what would generally happen is at the end of the election, we'll share the root. And then if you submitted a vote, you'll have one of the leaves of that tree, and we'll give you a proof that says that you can mathematically verify that says your vote was included within the overall tally of the tree. Now, in general, that's sort of an obfuscation of your vote from the general public. They don't know all of the details of the tree. They only know the specific path for their vote. But there are ways, like I said, the transactions themselves for voting are eventually going to be on chain. So for example, if there was one candidate and you're the only person to vote for them, and you vote for like using a very specific amount. So like say like you're the only person to vote for me, and you voted like 1.38692 L1 vote tokens. That's going to be difficult to obfuscate because people will see that like at the end tally, I have that exact number of vote, and they'll see that you made a transaction for that amount to the tallying backend. So that was sort of technical. I apologize. We can provide a little more guidance on that later on. But in general, that's how the tallying will work. It will be provable, but it won't happen on chain.
Nice. Okay, next question. Who is eligible to vote on Lamina1? I think I wanted to make this super clear because I feel like regardless of how much we communicate this, there's probably going to be some confusion when voting launches, but you have to have staked on Lamina1 to be able to participate in voting and governance, right?
Yes. So we've talked about this in the past. Eventually, we want to provide a mechanism for you to acquire voting power, generally speaking, in non-staking ways. So like through influence or through success in launching projects or something. So eventually, hopefully there are other avenues for you to acquire vote tokens. For now, the only way to get vote tokens and participate is to stake through the traditional staking mechanism that's currently live. And like I said, the amount of vote tokens you get will be proportional to the amount of staking power you have. So it's not proportional to the amount you stake, it's proportional to the amount you stake times the time period that you stake, which is essentially your staking power. Right now, it's either going to be like a 1-to-1 or maybe 0.1-to-1 ratio, just to keep the vote token balances a little more wieldy. So like we already have people with 1 billion voting staking power. And so like I want to keep the voting token numbers something you can comfortably deploy and wield. So we might like cut it by 10 or by 100. So if you have like 1,000 stake tokens, you'll get 10 or 100 vote tokens, but everyone will have the same proportion. So whatever it is you have in stake power, you'll get a proportional amount in vote.
Yeah, Jacko Girl actually has a question that she just popped into the chat, and she was like, if you unstake, are your stake tokens removed? You can't unstake.
Do you unstake?
Tokens.
You
Wait,
can unstake tokens. Yeah, once the period expires, You
Okay,
are
yeah,
allowed
yeah.
to unstake your tokens. The tokens stay there even after the period expires until you manually unstake them. Currently, the vote token has been written so that you do not lose your vote tokens when you unstake your stake tokens. So you can unstake and restake and continue gathering more vote. So that's currently how it works at the moment. The vote contract is upgradable. So this is one of the new contracts we're implementing that does have upgradable functionalities. And so, based on feedback, based on how things go, there might be an avenue for that to change, so that vote token does get lost as you unstake. But currently, we're just, you can remove your stake tokens, you can restake them, do whatever you want. Your voting balance will be unchanged by that unstaking.
Yeah, that was a super good, like, technicality question. But yeah, I think, the general CTA that, like, I'm gonna be really putting in front of the community over the next few weeks is, if you have a really strong opinion on what you want to be done with the economic policy of Lamina1 and you want to be able to vote in this election, like, make sure you have at least, something staked so that you can get some voting power, right? And obviously those who stake more will have more voting power in the network, which I think is just important, right? Like, and it's why we kind of wanted to get some of this information out in front of the community in advance of voting, just so that people can kind of, prepare how they want to, participate and stuff. That actually leads into my final question before we go into a little sneak peek of a prototype that we've pulled together. But we also announced via the blog post earlier this week that there's going to be a uh, kind of like a limit or a requirement that people are going to have to meet to be able to be nominated for the OMMA, right? We mentioned that it was 20 million staking power, which basically limits the amount of folks who can be nominated to like the top 50 participants in the kind of early economy of Lamina1. So my question is like, what can folks do who aren't like, we had a number of people who are like right on that threshold, right? We've been looking at a lot of the data, and there are some folks who are like just below that threshold for 20 million staking power. But like, if someone is not eligible now for nomination, but is thinking about running, what are some things that they can do over the next, few weeks or so to be able to rally for that position?
Yeah, so a couple things to unpack here. Yeah, there's a 20 million vote token sort of limit by which you need to meet before you can nominate. That doesn't mean you can't vote though if you have less than that. So nominee is just putting a candidate up for a vote. The reason we put that threshold there was to when I talk about turnout, like one way to kill turnout or effective governance is to just flood people with 100 different choices in which they don't have like a really good way of making informed decisions of. And so what I didn't want to happen is like 100 people, candidates being on that list, and then like there's no sort of congregation of votes or decision um, amongst like a group of people toward a specific community member, and instead everyone's votes are spread so thin that it's going to be the person with the most vote tokens that essentially chooses the seat. So
Mm-hmm.
like there's a balance we have to make here, which is to like keep the nomination pool like small enough that informed governance can actually happen. Not only informed, but governance that actually reflects both a, a significant majority of users and financial power, versus giving everyone a shot to be a candidate. That said, like that's why we're having this AMA. If you if you don't meet that threshold and you're like a diehard, you think you're going to be an amazing candidate, we can talk about it. Like there's still time to move that needle a little bit. We'll be careful in doing so. Right now, that threshold puts us at a roughly 50 people who are eligible to nominate. So that's up to 50 different candidates that would be on that list. Not everyone's going to nominate, probably. So at least for this first election, maybe there's a richer way to nominate people moving forward that we can look at. But at least for this first election, given the time frame, this is just the way that we came up with to sort of limit the candidate pool. If you again want to be a candidate, you're not going to have enough nomination voting power to nominate yourself. I think it's probably a good idea to have a channel in the Discord, if we don't already, where people can sort of pitch themselves as nominees prior to the
Mm.
election start or the nomination phase starting, and maybe try to gather some support there. The nomination phase in general is, one person, one nominee. So, if you have 80 million vote tokens, you can't nominate four different people. You can nominate a single person. But it also means if someone's already been nominated, you can't renominate them. So we'll have 50 people, roughly, maybe more, depending on what staking activity looks like in the next couple weeks, who will be able to select you as a nominee. So I think, yeah, we'll try to provide some type of channel for you to sort of pitch yourself as a candidate.
Yeah, I'll launch that actually today after I post the AMA recap. I'll start pulling up that OMMA election channel so that we can just kind of get started on early campaigning. I'll be there to kind of answer election specific questions. That's I should have probably done that when we put the article down, but yeah.
Oh, John makes a good point. I'm just reading the chat. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
20 million to be eligible. It's 20 million to actually do a nomination. So
to
you could have
nominate.
no
Oh, okay.
tokens and be a candidate. You don't have to have any vote tokens to be a candidate. You just need the 20 million in order to nominate someone. And it just to detail there, that 20 million isn't spent when you do the nomination. Um,
Hmm.
20 million is just like a threshold, um, and you keep the 20 million when you do the nomination.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I was a little bit confused about that when writing the blog post, so I'll go in and clarify that as well. So it's just to make the nomination itself. Oh,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I will definitely clarify that. Good catch, guys. All right. So I guess kind of next step, I mean, Will, you mentioned we've been kind of chatting earlier this week about kind of sharing like an early prototype that the L1 engineering team has been developing that's kind of like a sketch of some of the upcoming functionality that's going to be launching in about a month or so. Obviously not representative of final design or like the pages that folks will actually see. It's kind of wireframey, but did you still want to dive into that today?
Yeah, let me see if I can share screen sometimes. I get
Yeah, sometimes it can
a
be
hard
funny
time.
depending on whether or not Discord's decided to push an update this week or not.
Yeah, so this is literally just a wireframe prototype. It's not like something we actually use in development, other than like this is how we sort of guide how I've been sort of trying to feel out what the UI and the flow is going to look like. So the actual governance process will look and feel a little bit different, but this is sort of representative of the flow. So it's a quick way to sort of iterate over ideas and designs. Um, so the governance will have its own tab within the hub. And within that tab, there's going to be different forms of governance. There's going to be the OMMA Council, the OMMAC Council, different proposals that you'll be able to vote on. The only thing that'll be live at first will be the OMMA Council election. And that will happen generally over 4 phases. And one thing we were talking about before this call is maybe we'll add sort of a pre-nomination phase as well, sort of to fit in with that channel we were just talking about, a way for you to basically pitch yourself for nomination. So yeah, we might add another phase here at the beginning. But in general, the actual election process itself will happen in 4 phases: nomination, campaigning, voting, and then the results phase. We'll have like some call to action banner to what we have on the hub front page, which will announce any events around the election. We're considering doing some town hall AMAs, which we would invite any of the nominees to attend. to sort of do live discussion, as well as the community as well. And then, there's going to be a list of people who have been nominated. So these would be people who have received nominations, and a way for you to do a nomination on this list. So this one, give me a sec, actually. One moment. This is an older version. Going to... not working. One sec. I'm not sure why I made a change that made it disappear, but generally speaking, you would have, during the nomination phase, you would have a nominate button here, which would allow you to, when you click on it, it'll bring up a modal, and it's like, who do you want to nominate? And like I said, you can nominate yourself, you can nominate any other address or L1 username with that modal, and it'll just make sure that you have the threshold of 20 million tokens before you actually submit the nomination. Nominations cannot be changed. So once you submit a nomination, you can't revoke it or change it. If you are nominated, this is something we're working on at the moment, and you want to reject your nomination for whatever reason, there's going to be, and it was here, I don't know why it's gone now, there was a reject nomination button that would basically allow you to sign a message submitted to the contract and say, like, I don't actually want to be a candidate. You don't get, so like that person doesn't get their nomination back, but it is sort of removed from the voting process. So people can't vote on that candidate and waste votes, or, accidentally, elect you to a council seat that you don't want. There's like some further details we're working through here, which is like, can a candidate be a smart contract? If it is a smart contract, does it need to be like an open source verified smart contract? Those are all levels of detail we're working through at the moment. And like, if it is a smart contract and it hasn't been open sourced, is there an override function that allows us to reject the candidate ahead of time? So there's some level of detail we're still working through there, but in general, the nomination phase will sort of look like this. It doesn't even show. All right, give me 2 seconds. You can field some questions while I'm trying to fix this, because there's pieces
Totally.
missing.
Yeah, just to clarify, I got it wrong in the blog post too. I thought that you needed to be nominated, not to nominate. So I will definitely be adjusting that within the blog post. I think that's a really important clarification that we all got here today. And also, Jacko Girl, that answers your question on like, what if I don't want to be a nominee and someone nominates me? So you will definitely be able to decline that message. I think that's super important. Let me see.
All right, we're gonna try this version and see if it does what we want it to do. So yeah, you'll be able to nominate a candidate. You'll be able to sort of reject your nomination if you're logged in as the user that was nominated. And that's basically it for the nomination phase. Yeah, and I think we'll probably have some links here to like that nomination channel that we were talking about within Discord. Any questions in the chat so far about this phase before we move on?
Not that I see in here. I guess I've got a couple of follow-up questions that happened in the chat earlier. So are gas fees going to be required for nomination and voting?
Good question. Gas fees. in general are required. We might be able to subsidize them for nominations. For voting, gas fees will be required. Yes. They're going to
Okay.
be very small though.
Awesome. And Killen asked, so no more downvoting candidates, right? I know that was like kind of actually in super early tests of the voting plan, we did have the ability to downvote, but we removed that, correct?
We have removed that. Yeah, it did create some interesting mechanics, and I wouldn't say there's an extremely strong case for it to have it or not have it. But generally speaking, no, we're not counting having negative voting right now. At
It
least
was
not for
definitely,
elections.
yeah, it was definitely interesting testing out that functionality early on. I feel like personally, like for candidates, it feels a little bit funny, but I don't know, for potentially like proposals or ideas and stuff, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, no downvoting in this kind of round. I also have a couple of other community questions that were submitted either via the Discord channels, discussion channels earlier this week, or via the form that we included at the end of the blog post. So Ideala's at, oh wait, no, we went over this one. How did you calculate? Well, I guess like, yeah, we already went over Ideala's question, which is how do you calculate the 20 million staking power for nomination eligibility? So we'll kind of skip past that. Ed did ask a question though. He said, there's some potential weirdness about vote and stake tokens becoming disconnected since, stakes get burned when the stake is withdrawn, but it's not clear if you get to keep the associated votes. Can you explain further? I mean, we answered that a little bit with Jackal Girl's kind of question. Is there any other kind of info that we want to relay about the kind of relationship between vote and stake tokens, particularly like that ratio between the amount of vote and stake tokens you get?
The ratio is maybe less interesting than,
Mhm.
I mean, it's going to be a flat ratio, but there are like, yeah, there's a couple of important questions there. One is like the mechanics of the vote token versus the stake token. The stake token is not a token that gets spent in any way. It's just a
Yeah.
token that exists and represents, influence, and it gets removed if you unstake. That is one way we could have done vote. We could have made it so like for each election, you don't actually end up spending your vote. You just end up deploying whatever voting power you have in specific directions, and it doesn't actually go away unless you end up unstaking. And that's still a
Mm.
direction we could think about exploring. But the way that there is a separation between the two tokens as currently designed, which is, the vote token is designed to be spent and used, whereas the staking power is not designed to be used or consumed. And so it doesn't make as much sense to remove the vote token when you unstake, because it will create some weirdness where like if you could utilize vote token and then unstake it, and like the amount that you unstaked will subtract a number of vote that you potentially already used. It starts getting like a little bit messy. It's not as clean as staking, unless we move to a model where it was, like I said, it's more about deploying voting power in specific directions during specific governance activities. So like we would say like this week you can utilize or not even this week, like for a specific election or for a specific proposal vote, you could guide your vote in one direction or another. I think like one argument for making it consumable is like to make people a little more uh, thoughtful about how they use it and where they use it. But I can easily imagine arguments for the other way, especially in terms of turnout. You're probably going to get a lot more turnout and a lot more voting if it doesn't actually end up consuming your vote. So there's trade-offs in both approaches, but there is a disconnect, and the reason why that disconnect exists is because the vote token was made to be consumed
Hmm.
versus the staking power. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something that I pointed out in the blog post too is like if you don't want to vote in this first election or the first two elections and you want to like save up your vote for like something super important, like you can totally do that, right? Like if you're a creator and you want to save up all of your voting power for when proposals launch so that like, you can kind of start upvoting projects and that's how you would spend your vote rather than electing in the monetary authority, like that's possible, right, in this system. Um, I think John Mark actually called this out earlier this week in one of our channels, just kind of talking about like how the idea of spending vote tokens in general was like really interesting to him. And he also kind of asked for a clarification just on kind of like how are like right now, right? We have stake, but no one has vote tokens like in their Lamina1 wallets right now. So do you have like any details about like how those vote tokens are going to be kind of like airdropped, what that schedule is going to look like how that's going to work prior to the election kicking off?
This is the airdrop of the vote tokens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean it's probably just going to be a simple like distribution. You won't have to do anything specific as long as you have staking power before the vote token is deployed. We'll pre-mint, and distribute some tokens to you. So I don't think there's going to be like a claiming process or anything.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. He was definitely asking like, are vote tokens re-airdropped with the same fixed schedule? Do your full stake amount? Like, do future vote issuances, are those in line with stake issuances? Like questions kind of are around how that's gonna work, right?
Right.
Um, okay, so Jack Girl also asked, like, tell us a little bit more about how campaigning is going to work for the two upcoming elections. Like, is there going to be a separate channel for the discussion of nominations, like one for OMMA, one for OMAC, like, and then have like a pinned thread for each actual candidate? Like, are there going to be working channels, et cetera, et cetera? So the way that I was thinking about this, so this is kind of my purview, obviously, as community manager, was that yeah, I wanted to have kind of like a general election channel for the upcoming OMMA and OMAC elections, right? Where it'll just be a discussion channel where everyone can just talk about, all candidates, all people can ask questions, kind of we'll make announcements there about upcoming town halls and starting windows and schedules and all of that. And then each kind of nominee who accepts their nomination then also gets a kind of like thread, right? We've been using threads kind of a lot for, specific projects that have been launching. But they'll basically have a thread where they will manage that channel and you'll be able to kind of interface with them directly, ask them questions. They'll be able to use that to campaign. Yeah, I think, those threads will be pinned within that kind of master election channel for each of the two upcoming elections that we have coming up. I was assuming that like that general channel will be both kind of an announcements channel and a working channel, but honestly, like I am open to ideas from you all on like how you think the best way to structure that is. I think in general, like I don't want a ton of channel bloat here, right? I want it to be easy to navigate. Um, and I also want, these campaign channels generally to be kind of like run by the candidates themselves, right? We're kind of getting into this fun phase through this voting and governance where, we started out with building the project kind of centralized, and we're, moving towards decentralizing a bunch of these systems. So trying to make it so that, we have a place where I can run and make announcements from, but then, allowing candidates to run their own channels and run their own campaigns kind of like independently of us having to handhold or have a bunch of requirements or stuff like that. So hopefully that clarifies things. I know Will kind of went into kind of those structures as well. But again, if you have any ideas on how you think it would be interesting to kind of structure those, candidate threads or, the general OMMA channels or OMAC channels. Let me know. Those are going to be launching super soon, right? I'm going to launch the OMMA channel this afternoon. So just let me know. We're always listening, obviously. Jack Weaver also asked, and I may need to ask some like clarifications for this, but she asked in her form, what's like the worst that can happen with this current voting model? And she writes, I mean this seriously, like with a contract like this and with a system like this, like have we thought about kind of like worst case scenarios or things that we're going to be looking out for, any kind of like guardrails that we've kind of set up to avoid a potential catastrophe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hinted at a couple of things we're considering, like the smart contract thing. Like, can somebody put up a sort of malicious smart contract, or you know, something up there that people end up voting on, and then somehow harms the council? That's all stuff we're sort of considering and trying to create some guardrails or fallback mechanisms for. If for whatever reason the election was, unsuccessful, um, and we needed to sort of restart it, there's like ways that we can do that because the vote tokens aren't actually spent and moved until the end of the election, and we can reset the nomination contract. And there are like a bunch of different sort of bad scenarios that we're considering. The vote token's upgradable, so we can make changes if we needed to for that. There's a bunch of things we're considering and making fallback plans for. Yeah. As for what like the worst thing that could happen is, I hard to say for sure. The vote, nothing in this system uh, is currently tied directly into the council multisig at the moment. So there's sort of still a manual process that happens where we add the candidate to the multisig. So even if the election were to go horribly wrong, and everyone ended up losing all of the tokens they used for voting, um, we could redo the election. We wouldn't move the candidate over into the multi-sig, and we could reissue those vote tokens in at least this first election until we sort of put some more automated, less controlled guardrails in place.
Yeah, that's super good to know. And also something that we often do here at Lamina1, well, that I often do is like my brain also goes there a lot, which is like, okay, we're creating this new feature. What's the worst thing someone can do to exploit this? Um, one more kind of thing that I did want to point out to folks before we sign off is there are also kind of like limits to the authority of the OMA and its ability to change things. So I'm just calling this out personally because obviously we've had a ton of people within our channels kind of talking about like how they just want to unlock every single rewards token on the network all simultaneously. I called this out within the blog post and stuff too, but please note that like any changes to unlock rates or issuance schedules are subject to guidelines that we put pretty clearly in the governance white paper. So, the LL1 quarterly unlock rate is, staying between 0 and 8%, right? We've mentioned that the RL1 quarterly unlock rate staying between 2.5 and 15%. And the idea that like RL1 and RL1 unlock rates should not adjust more than 1.5% from the previous quarter. So again, if anyone's listening into this and planning to run on a platform of the fact that they're just going to unlock everyone's rewards tokens at 100%, unfortunately, that's not possible. So I just wanted to make sure that that was super clear to folks as we go into elections. We really want to make sure that we're protecting against inflation and other economic decisions that could be detrimental to our long-term holders or active participants on the network, for pretty clear reasons, but just wanted to call that out. at the end of this AMA. So
We still have a few phases to go through real quick
okay,
on
yeah,
the
go for it.
prototype.
Yes.
So just to blow through these quickly, because again, if you guys have feedback or considerations or questions, feel free to post them in the community after the AMA or if we have any time at the end. Yeah, we are going to have Discord channels or threads for each of the candidates that are automatically generated. There's going to be an application form. I think we asked people, did we already send that out, Casey, for feedback on what these questions might look like
Yeah, and I was
for the
planning to
application
drop
form?
that. Yeah, I was planning to
Cool.
drop that in at the end here. Yep.
Cool. So this will be stuff you can weigh in on, like what is the sort of set of questions that we ask each candidate to fill out for their candidacy. Those will all be visible and something you can review during the campaigning process and the voting process. During the voting process, you'll be able to vote for the candidate, obviously, that you prefer. Give me a sec. And so like this will be something that you can vote as many times as you want. So if you wanted to, as long as you have vote tokens available to spend, you can spend them across as many candidates as you want. And so you'll just, select an amount that you want to give. Again, just be aware that votes are sort of, you can't back out of them. They're final. They can't be changed, though of course you can vote for additional candidates moving forward. And then, yeah, you can do it for as many candidates as you'd like. Once the voting phase is over, during the voting phase, you will be able to see both the total vote count for each candidate, as well as the amount you voted for each individual candidate. And then at the end, we'll announce the winner. We hope to have some type of visual that sort of shows how the vote changed, at least at discrete time intervals. So you can sort of get a sense for how the election went. This will sort of be extra credit if we can get it up in time for this election. But one thing I wanted to point out was like this notion, we talked about it, the tallying of the votes will not be on chain. They're going to be done off chain, and then we'll be able to provide you with proofs. So this is what that might look like. This is like a very abstract vision of what a Merkle tree kind of looks like. And you'll see the votes that you've made. You'll be able to verify them against this Merkle tree. So there's root of the tree, there's all the other candidates, there's this specific candidate you're looking for. If you had multiple votes, they would show up here. And then there's the aggregate of all the other votes that voted for that candidate. So this is sort of a rough initial idea of what the tallying process and what the proof process will end up looking like. So again, if you have some additional ideas to make that a little bit more clear or like a little bit more interesting, feel free to send them our way.
Yeah,
but yeah,
totally.
that'll basically be the entire process.
Awesome. Yeah, and Erasmus asked, like, is there going to be a page in the hub that shows the current seats after they're elected? So yeah, we've got this kind of election winner thing that'll kind of show up and appear on that last phase there. All right. So yeah, I mean, we're officially at time. So again, as Will mentioned, if you haven't yet already, we'd love you all to share your thoughts on the current voting plan with us in exchange for some bonus rewards. So definitely go into that survey. It asks a bunch of questions about, that nomination requirement, about like what kind of questions you want folks to be answering within that kind of like official candidate entry form, right? As well as just kind of like any ideas, questions, thoughts you have on the governance process as a whole. Obviously, we wanted to, again, give the community a review period, a chance to weigh in before, this we put the final touches on stuff and knock out those updates to the governance white paper. So definitely share your thoughts. Let us know soon. Obviously, we're building pretty quick. The current voting launch is targeted. We said 90 days following the launch of staking on the platform. So that hits us at February 24th, 2024. But, I'll be announcing official dates for kind of each of those election phases above. Or that we just kind of talked about over the next couple of weeks. So definitely stay tuned on the new OMMA channel that we're going to be launching this afternoon for, all types of updates and stuff around that. In the meantime, again, share your feedback. We do have some upcoming testing initiatives we'll be launching with top testers next week around some recent refactors we did on the back end of the hub. So we've been doing some other stuff with top testers this week around new wallet connector reown functionality. We've got some more tests for you all next week that we're going to be kicking off. And of course, getting ready for the launch of nominations and campaigning next month, right? So the campaigning window isn't technically open, but, if you want to start jockeying for positions or, getting to know a rich and powerful person with a lot of staking power and trying to secure a nomination, definitely, get to it. Voting will be launching quite soon. And yeah, we'll be back on in 2 weeks for another AMA. Talk of that one is still TBD. We've got a lot of things in development right now. A lot of launches kind of in our log that we're just kind of waiting on to get kind of confirmed. But yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thanks all so much for joining. This was a great one. And again, really appreciate your feedback and questions and all of this. Excited to get these kicked off. Until when do you have time to fill it in? I mean, I don't have a deadline for it, but if you want us to check it out while we're in the throes of designing the governance and voting page, I'd say within the next week or so, probably. Amazing. Thanks all so much, and talk to you soon. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us.
Of course. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.